Welcome in everybody to another episode of Play Like a Jet Live. I'm Luke Grant. Today we haven't got Clay. We have a very special guest. We've got Alex Rollins joining us. If you haven't seen his work over on YouTube, he does an incredible job. Alex Rollins, NFL, you'll find all his work. Dropped a video this week on RG3, which is a really good watch. Some really nice pieces up on Daniel Jones. But the series that caught my eye was something he did on the 49ers defense. And he has a series of videos over there. So welcome in, Alex. And how are you going, man?
Thank you so much, man. Yeah, appreciate you having me on, and I'm excited to talk about the Jets. Haven't done too much on the channel, but I'm ready to dive in.
Yeah, let's do it. So give us a bit of background. How did you start over there on the YouTube channel? Because 50,000+ subscribers now, much great content. How did that all start for you?
Thank you, man. Yeah, so I really, when looking at football and watching the game, when you're on the broadcast angle, there's just so much that's going on that you can't see, right? So it kind of zooms in on the ball, and it's just on the quarterback. All the receivers run off the screen, and the ball just kind of magically floats off screen, and you're like, wait, is that guy open? Was he not open? What's going on there? So I found the Scouting Academy, which is put on by NFL personnel, players, or people just in the business. And it really gets into scouting and the all 22 angle, which shows all 22 players. And that's what the coaches use to break down their own teams and whatnot. And it opened my mind, and it just blew me how much is missed watching the broadcast and how much is really going on. It's an unbelievable game, and it's very complicated and detailed, but the more you learn about it, the more interesting it is. So that was about 2015, 2016, and made a bunch of crappy videos, and they just got a little bit better. And here I am just trying to put out quality content.
We appreciate you taking the time to jump on with us. For those guys who didn't watch last week, we had Tim Jenkins on, and we went through the expectations for the Jets offense in 2021 with Mike LaFleur. Today, Alex and I are going to dive more into the defensive side of the ball. Now that Robert Saleh has come over, the new head coach, what kind of scheme he's going to bring. So, Alex, I wanted to start with a couple of videos that I found from you. I think it was in 2019, talking about the Robert Saleh scheme. So he obviously came from Seattle and Jacksonville. He's from that single high cover 3 scheme. That's what he brought over in 2018 or 2017 when he started with the 49ers. I was wondering if you could give the viewers a bit of a background into how that scheme started as a cover 1 scheme, and then the development in 2019, where it was still a similar scheme but had some tweaks to how he was running it.
Yeah, certainly. So when you really dive into Saleh's scheme and kind of the principles he operates under, a lot of it is just based on speed. And that goes, you can look at the Pete Carroll tree, you can look at all these different guys, like you said, Jacksonville. It's all about speed. So he wants that in the defensive line, he wants that in the secondary, the corners, the safeties, everybody. That's the main key part of things. And so just based on, as you said, there's cover 3. And Saleh, it was very similar to what Pete Carroll was doing in terms of it was predominantly 3 deep, and the corners are going to play zone coverage. Everybody's going to play zone coverage. There's not going to be a lot of blitzing. We're going to have a fairly simple scheme. Everybody's going to know what they're doing on every play in terms of we're not going to overload our defensive players with a bunch of different things in terms of cover 2, cover 1, cover 4, all this different stuff. We're going to predominantly play one type of coverage, and that's going to allow everybody to play really, really fast. So when we start to go through each of the, as you said, things started to get tweaked a little bit in 2019, and we had the big Super Bowl run and stuff, and the defensive line, there's some impressive talent, as everybody knows. And one of the key things was the wide 9 aspect of his defense. So when we look at the Pete Carroll tree, the wide 9 specifically refers to the defensive linemen and the defensive ends. So Pete Carroll typically plays 5 on the line, so it's going to be 4 defensive linemen and then 1 linebacker who's going to usually play off in zone coverage. So he's typically running 4. The Pete Carroll tree really doesn't blitz that much at all. What Saleh did, what a little tweak he did, was the wide 9 stretches these guys out. So these defensive linemen, instead of playing typically on the outside shoulder of the left tackle and right tackle, they're going to go outside of the tight ends, or if there's not a tight end, what they call a ghost tight end, where they're going to be really, really wide. And that just really emphasizes the speed aspect of things. So we're going to get Nick Bosa or Eric Armstead or Dee Ford. We're going to get these guys in a lot of space and allow them to use their speed on these bigger left tackles and right tackles, where those guys are bigger dudes, 330, 350. They're not going to be able to handle all that speed in space. So that was a critical aspect of why we saw the 49ers really explode in terms of, their defensive line they have talent up and down the board on their defense, of course, but their defensive line was really what drove the party, and what, really, it was really, their whole team was centered around this defensive line. So when we look at the different ways that the wide nine affects the rest of the defense, and this will definitely tie into the Jets, it's going to affect the linebackers. It puts a lot of stress on the linebackers. So I think kind of an interesting parallel with, the Brandon Staley defense. I guess that's foreshadowing how we're going to look at the cover 4 coming up in 2020 and whatnot. But when you push out those defensive linemen, as opposed to what Staley does, which he pushes them in, but when you push out for the 49ers, the defensive linemen, it's going to put a lot of stress on Fred Warner and Dre Greenlaw for the 49ers to play the pass and the run, because we have such wide open lanes on the inside now, because those two guys are outside even further. So when you look at it, it worked very well for the 49ers because Fred Warner and Dre Greenlaw were so good at reading run pass. And I can't stress enough, if you take one step the wrong way, you're going to have massive wide open lanes. And the 49ers for years have been very, very good against the run. But if you remember, going back about 10-ish years ago, the Dream Team Eagles they implemented the wide 9 defense, and it was epically bad because of that very reason. They had really good skill on the outside, but there was wide open rushing lanes, and teams just pounded them through the middle. So I always think it's interesting to give kind of the not the dark side, but a negative to why a scheme may work or not work, just because there's always give and take with things. It's not always, oh, this is the best scheme to do, or this or that. You want to position it towards your players and what they're going to be best at. So it will be critical for CJ Mosley. And sorry, I'm jumping around a little bit.
No, go
for it. I'm getting excited. But back to the 49ers and how they operated in 2019. So it puts a lot of pressure on the second level linebackers, and it asks the corners to play. They're going to play outside, and they're going to play predominantly zone coverage. So they're going to have their butts to the sideline, and they're going to drift back in coverage. And it's really going to put a lot of pressure on those linebackers to cover. I know I keep saying that, but if you're in cover 3 and let's say the outside receiver goes underneath, that then becomes the linebacker's man to take. And so once again, in the second level, those guys are going to be critical. When we start looking at the safeties, when it's cover 3, you're usually going to have a rotation from, if you're playing, let's say 2 high guys, so 2 high safeties. If it's cover 3, only one of those guys is going to be the middle of the field defender. So they're going to rotate down, and it's also going to be very critical for them to use that speed and run with any of the receivers or tight ends coming over the middle. And so that's really the basis of what Saleh's scheme was, and where, we start to see there will still be cover 3 aspects. And in 2020, he played a lot of cover 3. So it's not that he completely is playing 100% cover 4, because nobody really is. But that's really the basis of where it started in 2018, 2019, and 2017, of course, and where we'll start to go. But once again, I don't want to jump too far ahead.
Yeah. Alex, you mentioned the change to the wide 9 and how important that was and integral to the shift we saw. Do you think the catalyst for that decision was more because of the skill set of Bosa and D Ford, or because of the ability the linebacking core gave him and the freedom with how well they did their run fits and played in pass coverage? What do you think was the driving force there? Do you think it was more about the D-line group or about the linebackers?
No, that's an incredible question. And I think it really was based on the personnel. They started spending these first-round picks on these guys. Solomon Thomas didn't quite pan out, but Eric Armstead, Buckner, and then Bosa. So they brought Chris Kosurik in too, which is kind of an underrated name. He was the D-line coach, and he kind of based out of it with Jim Schwartz, who was one of the quote-unquote fathers of the wide 9, if you will. So that was an aspect of it. But, as we've heard Saleh say on some of the podcasts he's been doing in the offseason, he wants to bring in different minds and guys who aren't necessarily similar to him, guys who are going to give him opposing ideas or just different ideas. And I think when you look at what Kosurik did with that defensive line group, paired with what Saleh was willing to do, and it's so critical for these different coaches to be comfortable changing and tweaking little things. And if people remember, in 2017 and 18, this was not a great defense, and a lot of that was because of the personnel not being quite up to snuff. But there were questions where Saleh some people were calling for his head, if you will, in terms of his job security. So I think it's important that he was willing to change. He brought in Kosurik and really kind of relied on his other position coaches and really geared what he was doing in a way to get better towards his personnel, which obviously worked out really well. Oh, I can't hear you. Sorry. Hey, bro, you cut out. I can't hear you at all.
Have you got me now?
Yeah.
All right, cool. No worries. Sorry.
It's all good. It's all good.
In 2020, Alex, we saw a really large shift in not just Robert Saleh's defense, but also league-wide. So you talked about Staley and the cover 2 system, cover 4 quarters that he ran. He used that kind of nose backer with only 2 defensive linemen at times, a really intriguing system. The Colts and Eberflus ran that cover 2 a lot in 2020. And that did shift across to Robert Saleh's defense. So first of all, take us through some of the changes we saw, and then we'll get into the why, because obviously they had some injuries, and I understand the injuries to Sherman and Bosa, but also I think part of the shift is because of, ironically, Kyle Shanahan's offense and those cover 3 beaters and what we've seen take over the league. So talk to us a little about the changes we saw for Robert Saleh, and then maybe we'll get into the why that occurred.
Yeah, and I want to jump back real quick to the Super Bowl, and I do think I have a theory myself that we all know the jet chip wasp play against the Chiefs and Mahomes, where in ways it was a cover 3 beater, where there was kind of a dig route coming on the inside, and then Hill was going towards the middle of the field safety and then back to the corner. I think that really kind of shook Saleh to his core. I think he just kept thinking about that over the offseason. And, from week 1, we saw a dramatic shift in his philosophy in terms of going towards cover 4, as you said. I mean, they almost based out of it and almost played it more than cover 3. And they were predominantly playing cover 4 on early downs for the most part. It was shocking. And it goes back to what I was saying in terms of Saleh is willing to change and be up with the times, if you will. He's willing to look at the trends of the league and see where things are going. And I think we're slowly going to see more of a shift towards quarters and 2 high, as you just said. But Saleh was on the cutting edge of this. He was doing it from week 1. I remember watching him against Kyler Murray, and I was like, what is this guy doing?
Yeah.
This isn't Saleh. What's going on here? And I kind of thought it was just geared towards the spread option kind of air raid stuff that Cliff Kingsbury's doing over there. But no, he based out of it, and it wasn't because he lost Bosa. As you know, in week 1, it was right off the bat when he had Bosa. So it was really a philosophical change, which was really impressive to me. And what he did was he stayed with that wide 9 philosophy. So he's building on his own philosophy as time goes and making tweaks without necessarily scrapping something, or he's still staying within himself, which I think is really important. And what I think is interesting with Staley is that he really clumps his guys together and kind of tries to spill players and receivers or running backs outside to his linebackers or safeties coming into the alley, whereas Saleh still stays with the wide 9 when he's playing quarters. So tying things back to what I was saying before, that's really going to put stress on even more stress on the second level, because now we're going to have a second high safety. So those guys are even deeper. They're up high. And those linebackers are going to be sitting in the middle playing in a ton of space, whether it's CJ Mosley or Jared Davis. Those guys are going to have to cover a lot of space and cover those huge alleys in the run. So I just thought that was really interesting. But when we look at cover 4 in general, there are so many more things you can do from a coverage perspective. You have that help over the top. In a lot of ways, you are stressing the linebackers, but at the same time, you're not just having one guy. When we look at the jet chip wasp play, I actually went back and there was a clip. I just tweeted it today. In 2018, the Chiefs, and I'm sure they ran it plenty of times other than this, but in 2018, in that, I think it was 54-51, that Chiefs-Rams game on national television, they ran it, and the Rams happened to be playing 2 high. And instead of that safety sitting in the middle, there was 2 safeties. And Tyreek, he still burned one of those safeties, but the guy had much better positioning. And I think that's just kind of the 2 high scheme in terms of the today's NFL. It was kind of a microcosm for why it's so helpful and all the things you can do. So that'll help in terms of Brandon Staley's talked about limiting explosive passing plays being the primary way of doing things, whereas cover 3, since you have one more guy in the box and that guy isn't deep in cover 3, that you're playing more sound against the run and thinking about the pass almost secondarily. Whereas in 2 high, you're more ready for the pass and not as prepared for the run. But if we're limiting explosive passing plays, let's make them dink and dunk it down the field. You can do that all day long, and please run the ball as well. So the 4 deep aspect is critical, and I'm happy to see that Saleh did that, and I think he's really up with the times in terms of what he's bringing to the Jets. And he also showed an ability he blitzed more than he ever has. He was around 20th in the league through 18 and 19. And he was around 20%. And then this last year, he went up to 33%, and he was still doing all of that at cover 4. So I think it's really interesting and really important what he's doing and what kind of scheme he's bringing to the Jets. It's designed to attack the modern offense and not based on things that might have worked a little while ago in terms of the cover 3 aspects of defense.
Yeah, I think when I look at the league and that shift we've seen, a team that's really analytical and on top of those things are Buffalo. I look at the way they've developed. They've been, in quarters for a high percentage the last 2 years, and they also don't run the ball a lot. I think they were ahead of the game, and you're now starting to see some of these other defensive coordinators, shift with them towards the passing game and stopping those explosive passes. I was like you, though, Alex. I couldn't believe I chucked on, I think, week 13 or 14 just to see kind of what Saleh's scheme was like once he had Verrett and you saw lots of the quarters. And then I went back to week 1 against Arizona. I think he only had 2 single high snaps in the entire first half when I was charting it. Couldn't believe that volume. And then you did see it continue throughout the year. So I definitely agree. It wasn't just an injuries thing, having no Bosa, having Sherman. It was definitely a philosophical shift against both the spread, against mobile quarterbacks and all of those things.
Yeah, no, it was, yeah. I couldn't believe it. Week 1, as I said, I thought he was changing everything and just going towards almost a college defense, which in a lot of ways it is. And you mentioned the Bills. Another one I'll mention is Vic Fangio, who of course Staley coached under and whatnot. And he's been doing the 2 eye stuff for many years and kind of been in his own little world in that respect. But we've seen, the Broncos have been solid on defense this last year. He was really good with the Bears. Everywhere he's been doing impressive things. So I definitely think it's a trend we'll start to see moving forward. But it's good to see that Saleh is even ahead of the curve if you're a Jets fan, because he's coming in with a year of practice and knows what knowing how a team is going to attack you. Like if you're playing a bunch of different coverages, some of these teams want to major at a cover 2, cover 3, cover 4. I think that's what we saw with the Cowboys having an issue where they're trying to play everything, but then you don't know how teams are going to try and attack you. So during the week of practice, you don't know what you're trying to defend. You're having the scout team draw plays that are going to attack X, Y, or Z. But if you don't know exactly what you're going to see on Sunday, you're going to have an issue. So I think it's very important that Saleh has defined what he's doing, and while going forward with this new style of scheme and philosophy, he stayed true to some of his roots at the same time and really honed in on the cover 4 as well as the cover 3 still.
I thought that was an incredible point you just made, Alex, about how being predictable, everyone thinks it's a negative thing on defense, but it also in a way makes the offense more predictable. So something I haven't really thought about conceptually when thinking out the game, and thought that was great insight. I wanted to shift to a name that we've mentioned a ton already, and that's Fred Warner. So we talked about the stress that puts the wide 9 system and having the defensive ends outside the ghost tight end, what impact that has. Can you tell us a bit about his role specifically, maybe how it's developed? And then let's bring that parallel to CJ Mosley and Jared Davis, particularly Mosley. And if you think his skill set can replicate what Warner does, maybe not with the athleticism, but just in general.
Yeah, so Fred Warner played as a defensive back a lot of the time at BYU. And I think that was really important to the style of play that Saleh wanted out of him. And just really for the modern NFL, again, him being he's able to cover pretty much anybody on the field. And it's shocking to put on his film and see what he's able to do. Whether you think of even a linebacker who's comfortable guarding tight ends really, really well is pretty rare. That's not something you see every day. And he's able to take receivers across the field. And I did an episode on him a couple weeks ago. it's unbelievable. He's able. One example that pops to mind is he's just running with Golden Tate across the entire field. Sometimes, for example, you'll see when the defense is blitzing, and we will see that a lot with Saleh, and I'm sure with Greg Williams, double G over there, that you guys saw plenty of blitzes, but that's going to put even more stress on each of the coverage players, whether it's a linebacker, safety, cornerback, because you don't necessarily have the help that you can play towards. And so in this example, Fred Warner had Golden Tate coming underneath him, and he had no help on the other side of the field. And he swiveled his hips and was able to run all the way across underneath with Tate on an under route. And it was just unbelievable. I mean, there are nickel corners who struggle to do that kind of thing. So that's just one example of what Warner's really, really good at. As I've mentioned, his run pass keys, I would pay an unbelievable amount of money to sit in the meeting room with him and find out exactly what he's looking at. Typically it's the guard through the running back. So kind of a triangle of the two guards, the center, and then the running back. And you're seeing, high hat, low hat. If the O lineman drives down, then it's most likely a run. If he pops up, it's a pass. There's something else Warner's doing. He gets it 100% of the time, where on these play fakes, he almost has a foot back and he's just ready to guard whoever. It blows my mind. And he's able to turn around and just sprint down the field with anybody. So in the cover 3 scheme, which of course the Jets still will play a lot of the time, you're going to have to, if a team puts a trips formation or a 3 receiver formation on one side of the field and there's 3 receivers, the guy who's closest is numbered as the number 3 receiver. And a lot of the times a linebacker such as Fred Warner will have to be able to run with him in a cover 3 scheme. So I remember an example of Tyreek Hill burning some poor dude on the Chargers a couple years ago, where it's just Tyreek Hill on a linebacker, and you're like, that's not good ball right there. That's not going to be good. And that's the Chargers, cover 3 scheme, Pete Carroll, Gus Bradley, et cetera, et cetera. So Fred Warner is able to do that, and that will translate to the cover 4 scheme with the Jets. Moving to CJ Mosley as we're looking for kind of a parallel here. When we go back to 2018, because there is kind of the worry that he hasn't played much in last year, of course, and then just 2 games in 2019. He is able to do many different things, and just from a coverage perspective, he is able to do a lot of the things Warner does. I think he's a little more tight-hipped than Fred Warner. I mean, Fred Warner's pretty much, I think he's the best coverage linebacker in the game, in my opinion. And to replicate that, it's not going to be easy, and not something anybody else would be able to do. What I was interested seeing in 2019 is CJ Mosley and Greg Williams' scheme. Williams played a ton of Tampa 2, and that's going to have 2 deep safeties and have a middle run-through linebacker, a guy who's it's almost like cover 3 in an interesting way, where you are going to have a 3rd defender back because the linebacker is going to run through the middle of the field. And that was Mosley almost all the time. So from a coverage perspective, he was doing a lot of the things just based on coverage, where you're asking him to do Brian Urlacher, Derek Brooks types things, where he's almost a middle of the field safety in a way, and he's covering a ton of space. So I do think while the Greg Williams era didn't necessarily work out, I think that helped Mosley develop more and be able to play in more space as a coverage defender, and really just get that experience of even turning your shoulders, because the linebacker has to bust his butt through the middle of the field, and still be able to, I think, even if something isn't effective necessarily, just trying different things and practicing different things or looking at things a different way, I think is still very helpful. So to give one more parallel on Fred Warner and CJ Mosley, this last year, Fred Warner blitzed the most he's ever. I think it was about 90 times, which is really high for a linebacker. And that's something, especially on 3rd down, that we will see Robert Saleh do a lot. So what he'll like to do is he'll have his 4 down defensive linemen, and then he'll put Fred Warner over a guard or a center, and the O-line just has 5 blockers, right? So typically that's going to man up each offensive lineman with the 4 DLs and Fred Warner, and really put one-on-one situations. So then, guys like Carl Lawson, all these guys are going to have, especially if they're playing in space in the wide 9, are going to have a lot of success just in these one-on-ones. So I do think CJ Mosley will also fill in that role on 3rd down. He actually blitzed, I think it was 140 times in 2018 with the Ravens. So I had no idea that he was that prolific of somebody who was going to constantly be playing, attacking the quarterback like that. So I think there are a lot of really interesting similarities and parallels between Fred Warner and CJ Mosley's game, even if they're a little bit different style.
You said two things, Alex, that really jumped out to me. The first was speaking on Mosley in that Tampa 2 look. I actually made a video just last night for Play Like a Jet. Go and check that out on our YouTube, guys. And I think there was a play. It was the play he actually got injured late in the third quarter, early fourth quarter, where he was running down, carrying that 3 receiver vertically. I think it was John Brown, and he actually, spun his head around and had a pass breakup. And you saw his ability to be that Tampa 2 kind of deep rover, and the Jets would often then drop that defensive lineman into the soft spot of the zone where Mosley's been vacating from. So he does have that experience. And the other thing you talked about with the blitzing, it made me think about Jared Davis, who has not played well in the NFL so far, has been a well below average linebacker. But the strength of his game is his blitzing and his physicality and ability to blitz, especially on passing downs. I'm not sure whether he'll see the field on third down. Obviously, Mosley did a lot in Baltimore, who blitzes a lot with Wink Martindale. But I'm looking forward to seeing how that all shakes out.
Yeah, no, Davis, he was benched last year, and that was tough. And I'll be very interested to see how Saleh tries to rebound his career and get something out of him. As you said, he does blitz a lot, so maybe we'll see CJ Mosley kind of off the ball if Jared Davis is playing on third downs, and Davis assume more of the blitzer role and take on some of that. And yeah, it'll be interesting to see what Saleh does on third down since he started blitzing so much this year, third most in the league. And one more thing I want to add to that is it was surprising how few guys he has blitz. It's really Fred Warner, and then it was his nickel corner, K'Wan Williams. So I'll be really interested to see if, it's Guidry coming in as a nickel corner and blitzing on third downs or even first or second downs, who Saleh puts into that role, and maybe even Lamarcus Joyner, which is something we'll talk about as well.
Yeah, I'd look out for Michael Carter II as well from that slot position. Javelin Guidry played pretty well in limited snaps last year, but I think we saw a little bit of Carter's versatility as a safety, blitzing from that nickel spot at Duke. So I'm looking forward to seeing how that shakes out. Perfect transition there, Alex, to go into Lamarcus Joyner, because a name that I've heard personally for the last 3 or 4 years as this defense has developed is Jimmy Ward. That's a name that's been so crucial to the implementation of the cover 3 to the cover 4 now, and his role has evolved and changed, and he's been one of the most important parts. And Saleh talks about the importance of playing man coverage even in a cover 3 scheme, and always references Jimmy Ward. So Lamarcus Joyner looks like the guy that could fill that role. So detail what Jimmy Ward does, and if you think that's a natural fit for Joyner and some of his slot experience.
Definitely. So yeah, I think there's, as you said, it was perfectly said. I think there's a ton of parallels between the two players, and why Jimmy Ward was really good is he was able to kind of blend personnel groups. So sometimes offenses will try and put more tight ends or more running backs on the field to try and get bigger and pound the rock, or they'll try and put 3 receivers on the field and get you to put your nickel defender out there. Ward is very good at blending both kind of the safety, kind of the heavier guy, but then also the nickel guy. So, if a receiver goes out on the outside, he's able to guard him. He's able to guard in the slot. He's able to do so many different things. And I went back and looked at some of the Rams film when Lamarcus Joyner was there, because the Raiders put him in the slot, which didn't go so well for him. But, I think that experience was important. But when we look at what the Rams were doing with him, it was a lot of similarities to what the Niners were doing at Jimmy Ward. And I think Jaquiski Tartt is important to mention as well. Even though typically in a lot of cover 3 schemes, you're going to have that defined free safety and defined strong safety who's going to be closer to the box, the free safety deeper, kind of like what Seattle did with Earl Thomas and Cam Chancellor. Saleh really likes to mix Tartt and Ward around. He's going to put those guys all over the field. So it's not that I don't think, even though it's been rumored, I don't think Joyner is just going to sit in the middle of the field and May's exclusively going to play down in the box. I think he's going to interchange both these guys and do a lot of different things. And I think Joyner's experience with doing all of these things is one of the reasons that we can see why this will happen, where he has played nickel. He wasn't just playing deep free safety with the Rams. He was coming down into the box. He was sometimes used as a crosser, a robber, if you will, where they might start in too high and then he's coming down to the middle of the field and maybe taking a crosser across the field, or just playing as a rat defender, just a low hole zone defender. So I think that he will almost be a chess piece that Saleh is using on really any of the downs, and is comfortable using him all over the field, and not just necessarily in that free safety role. I think he'll be used everywhere.
That's incredible insight, and I really like the parallels there, and especially with the Rams, because that's when he graded best with PFF, playing in that single high role, but then also coming down, as you mentioned, a very versatile player. Alex, I wanted to put a bit of a bow on this incredible discussion now about Saleh's scheme and its development, and talk about the Jets in 2021, because I think they have this really interesting blend of personnel. The cornerback room is very, very raw. There's a lot of unknown quantities. They drafted a guy like Pinnock in the 5th or 6th round this year, who to me looks like a cover 3 corner. That's his skill set, playing on the outside in zone coverage. And then they have guys like Bryce Hall, who plays better with his eyes in the backfield, but more in the flat, like a cover 2 corner. So I'm really intrigued to see, do you think he is going to continue that shift to cover 2, cover 4, quite a blend with the Jets defensive line being fairly good? Do you think we'll see as much blitzing as he did in San Francisco last year? How do you see it all coming together this year?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think there will be a lot of similarity to more the 2020 style. I do think while it did go hand in hand with the personnel in 2020, there's just this general shift, and football's always evolving, as we all know. And I think really 2020 was kind of a plant your flag in the ground, where we're starting to see the quarters revolution coming, and all these too high different aspects. So cover 4 and cover 3, both, if you're playing zone coverage, that's going to be much more helpful for the corners. So we're not putting these guys on islands per se and saying, all right, you got to guard DeAndre Hopkins or, Stephon Diggs or any of these guys in the AFC East. So I think that's a really important aspect of things, where you're not necessarily going to see, I don't think you're going to see the stuff from 2019 as much. I do think he will be playing more and more cover 4. The defensive line, I'm really excited about Carl Lawson. I think the wide 9 scheme is absolutely perfect for him. We're going to move him outside, way outside, and I think they're going to unleash him as a speed defender off the edge, and I'm expecting a huge season out of him. And really all the other guys, I think when we look at what's called for that scheme, for that cover 4 scheme, where you're going to have more stress on the linebackers in terms of fitting the gaps and whatnot on the inside, I really like their interior line. I think those guys are going to be able to plug up. I really like Sheldon Rankings. I think plugging up the inside is going to be crucial, and it's going to be, we're going to see some of the similar success that we saw with the 49ers from last year. So I do have a lot of faith in what the Jets are doing. I think both on offense and defense, they're kind of with the times, if you will, in terms of going to too high, and then some of the stuff they're doing with the 49ers regime with, play action, Kyle Shanahan type stuff. So I'm excited about where the Jets are going. Honestly, I think there's been a lot of issues, of course, the last few years and, last few decades, if you will, but I think it feels different this time. And I think a lot of Jets fans would agree.
Yeah, I share your sentiment with the defensive line as well. I think during Greg Williams' tenure, the biggest thing that frustrated me as a huge Quinnen Williams fan was seeing how much he was used kind of on these stunts and twists, and he wasn't allowed to just kind of one gap, put his head down and go. We saw a little more of that last year. I think that's going to be a huge shift and a great improvement for his game, as he was top 10 among interior defensive linemen in pressures last year. And Carl Lawson with that kind of long arm inside stab with the swipe, he's going to be so good once from that wide 9 spot, as you mentioned, because he can go around the edge with speed, but that's going to open up the inside and the body of the tackle as well. So I can't wait to see how that develops. Last thing I've got for you, Alex, is just a quick transition to the Jets offense. So I asked this to Tim last week and talked about what iteration we're going to see of the Jets offense, because obviously having Mike LaFleur come over, working with Kyle Shanahan for 9 years, you have his brother up in Green Bay running some shotgun stuff with Aaron Rodgers. Obviously, that was because of his skill set. You see a little bit of empty up there too. And then you have the Rams, who run this kind of blend where they're running a lot of the 49ers, schemes and plays, but out of 11 personnel with tight splits. So without obviously being someone who watches the Jets a lot, with the guys they have on their roster, with Zach Wilson, who you've got a great video up on as well, what do you think we're going to see from LaFleur and this Jets offense in 2021?
Yeah, no, I thought it was a perfect fit, honestly, for what the Jets want to do in terms of drafting Zach Wilson. I thought with Shanahan that would kind of be one of the better fits for him in terms of what BYU did. If you watch BYU's film, they're almost running the Shanahan LaFleur offense. So it's such a seamless transition, and it does play to Wilson's strengths. He is more athletic. He does have the ability to throw on the run really well, which we haven't necessarily seen from some of the 49ers quarterbacks in this system, and the Rams a little bit as well with Jared Goff. So I'm very excited to see what Wilson does. I think when you watch Shanahan's games, there are just 3 or 4 times a game where a receiver is going to be wide open, and it's such an easy throw, and it just feels like for every guy, it raises their floor a little bit on a game-to-game basis. Where when you're booting outside and you're getting the defense to flow one way and you're come back the other, especially with somebody like Zach Wilson's skill set, both not that he's the fastest guy in the world, but just being able to boogie a little bit in the open field, as well as having an absolute cannon. I'm very excited to see what I think just from a rookie perspective too. I think this is the kind of scheme you want to be in, because it's not asking you to drop back every single play. You are getting a little bit of almost kind of leeway, as I said, like a higher floor, where you're not asked to just be a, classic NFL quarterback right off the gate. And at the same time, it pairs well with Wilson's abilities. So I'm excited about the offense. I'm excited about the defense, to be honest with you.
Jets, the over-under win is 6 at the moment, Alex, with Vegas. If you were going to take one side of that line, where would you go right now?
Hey, well, we're playing like 20 games this year or something. So, no, I'm taking the over. I definitely think the over. I don't think they're gonna blow past that necessarily. I think 6 is a low number to me. I am a little bit worried about, we haven't, there is so much newness to this team. We have the new quarterback and the new coaching staff. So that gives me a little bit of pause, but the last time I checked, I didn't realize that it was that low. So I'm taking the over on 6. I think the culture that Saleh brings from, I think I really like what he did with the 49ers. And I think the way they built their culture is something similar that he'll do with the Jets. So I'm taking the over. I'm excited about the Jets.
Love to hear it. Alex Rollins NFL on YouTube. Appreciate you coming on the show, sharing some of your knowledge about Saleh's scheme and everything else we've discussed today. Tell us a little bit about what's on the pipeline for you. As I mentioned, some incredible videos over there. So what's coming up for you over on YouTube and on your Twitter?
Yeah, so I come out with an episode every Saturday. I really like I choose a topic, and then I get really, really deep into the all-22 and just kind of explain, what's going on from my perspective, as well as some of the X's and O's in terms of the concepts, cover 3, dagger, that type of stuff. So this week I'm coming out with Jalen Hurts. I just started watching him today, and I definitely have some thoughts on him. So that'll come out Saturday. And if you're going to start watching, it's every Saturday. So come join me if you're interested.
Make sure you're checking Alex out over on YouTube every Saturday. He's posting, and make sure you're checking out what we're doing at Play Like a Jet live on our YouTube, and with Scott Mason over on the podcast. Really appreciate everyone listening in today to Play Like a Jet live. Thanks again to Alex. We'll see you next Wednesday at 7:15 p.m. Thanks, and we'll see you then.